Welcome to Unlocked, the home of common sense that speaks Britain language. Well, you may have missed it during the constant COVID doom-mongering of the mainstream media, but we are just 4 days away from the US presidential election. And after 4.5 tortuous years, we're just 63 days away from the final Brexit deadline. So on Unlocked today, we are covering both the race for the White House and the final days of Brexit. First, we have a roundup of the week's Brexit news with my favourite Brexit blonde bombshell, Belinda de Lucy. Next, Unlocked's US correspondent, Stuart Mitchell, joins us live from New York to tell us about the mood on this historic and some say almost apocalyptic American election trail. For his no-nonsense take on what the presidential race means and what it means for Britain, also joining us from the US, we have author James Lindsay, whose writings on critical race theory are rumoured to have influenced Donald Trump's decision to exit from all federal workplaces. Finally, last but by no means least, we're joined by my old mucker and former Brexit Party MEP colleague, John Tennant, whose book, product placement, Rebooting Brexit, completely sold out its first print run, but luckily for you, it went back on sale yesterday. So, top of the show, Belinda, there's been a lot going on in Brexit this week, and I think we should start with the fact that a certain Mr. Nigel Farage popped up at a Trump rally.
Yes, he did. But in fact, you know, Martin, before I start with the Brexit news, I do just want to take an opportunity to pay my respects to the victims of the most horrific, barbaric murders in France over the last week, because I'm not sure how long our mainstream media will talk about it. And it's really important that on shows, especially that are on Brexit, that we show solidarity to our European friends at a time like this, especially, and to show that actually French values, European values from liberty, equality, fraternity, democracy, all these essential values we all share without having to control each other in Brussels. These are just normal values we all share. We should stand by each other and just say, I'm going to say, Vive la France, and we are with you, our French friends, today. But on to Brexit news this week. Yes, we have had Nigel over with Trump. What a speech when he got on that platform. And he's got such a command over the audience. And he was introduced, I think, by Trump as the King of Europe, which I thought was very funny. And I thought that would get right up Guy Verhofstadt's nose. And it did, actually. The reaction in the EU from Nigel being involved in Trump's campaign was, of course, to be expected from the usual suspects. Guy Verhofstadt immediately tweeted out, he said, if Farage is Trump's secret weapon, his campaign must be in real trouble. Well, oh, how I laughed, because Guy Verhofstadt, if you remember, came over to the UK during the elections last year and joined in with the Lib Dem attempt to try and get number 10. And if anything's to go by, he wasn't so much a lucky charm for the Lib Dems, who are now polling below the Greens. And also, you know, Guy Verhofstadt, he was, on his watch, the EU lost one of its most important members, the UK. So yeah, a rabbit's foot and a four-leaf clover, Guy Verhofstadt isn't. So I don't think he can make much of a sound about Farage being involved with Trump's campaign. But yes, of course.
Isn't it funny, Belinda, how everybody complains about Nigel getting involved in the US presidential election, and yet none of the same people complained when Barack Obama came to the UK, told the UK would be at the back of the queue. Isn't it funny? But look, Nigel was on a roll. He was on Good Morning Britain this morning, and he gave us the delicious news, perhaps some surprising news, that he thinks Donald Trump is a full-blown Eurosceptic, and if he gets back in, will give the EU what for? Go on.
Yeah. You know, as we know, Donald Trump is a lover of the nation state. I think, like us, he believes that the public's best interests are served by parliaments or senates, Congress, making laws at a national level often, and rather than a centralized bureaucratic abomination over in Brussels. And I think Nigel said, you know, from north to south, east to west of Europe, people are wondering more and more why on earth their power is being taken away from them and centralized in Brussels. I think Trump is a great fan of Brexit. You know, that does help clearly. If Biden gets in, however, will he torpedo a trade deal? I'm not so sure. I do think the Democrats really need to read the Good Friday Agreement before commenting on it ever again. I'm not sure they really know what it's about. But of course, Trump is definitely UK friendly. I think he's the first president in 30 years, or certainly since Reagan, who's come out so openly in support of the UK, and we need our friends at the moment.
Yeah, it's true. And I remember that Anne Widdecombe said on the show a couple of weeks ago that the Democrats have never historically been that kind to Britain. Trump certainly is pro-Britain and, if you say, anti-EU. Now, the next story I'd like to turn to, Belinda, the most read story on the Daily Express politics website, because they love the fact that other European nations are feeling the pinch on Brexit. And it's this: Merkel faces catastrophe. No deal Brexit to hit Germany harder than any other EU nation. Tell us about that, Belinda.
Yes, well, I think the pressure is certainly on now. German businesses are really worried what's going to happen with the city, financial services, because a lot of their businesses rely on the City of London. It's not just Germany, though, that's worried about a no deal. Spain has come into the news a lot this week, putting pressure on the French, because, of course, Macron is still standing by the French fishermen. In fact, France's European minister said yesterday that the face of Brexit will be the face of our fishermen, and there is no reason to give in to British pressure. But I think, you know, Spain's saying, hang on a minute, Macron, we've got fruit and veg, you know, trading over into the UK that are going to be affected by this. If there is no deal, the UK is going to start trading with Morocco just across the water, you know, getting their oranges 16% less tariffs, and we're going to lose a lot of business. So I do think there are countries now putting pressure on Macron to buckle over fishing. I do think there'll be a compromise. However, Gove came out this week and he said there'll be no compromise on fishing. It's mixed messages all the time. We had one of the Welsh ministers saying, you know, putting pressure on Gove to compromise over fishing to get a deal, and Gove said, no way, Jose. So we will see what happens. It's mixed messages. It's all theatre at the moment. As we've always said, Martin, until the ink is dry on the paper, we've got to be very careful what we believe. We just need to be very focused at a time during COVID. There's a lot of distraction with the US election, a lot of distraction with the COVID numbers, that Brexit doesn't get kicked so far down the road, it turns into May's deal without us even realising it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple of big points there. I mean, first of all, Britain is Germany's third biggest trading partner after America and China. Now, we want to buy German goods. They want to sell cars to us, you know, so a no deal would harm them. And as for the French, asking us to cry into our onion soup about the French fishing industry, well, I'm afraid, cry me a river. We've had this conversation so many times on Unlocked, and that is this: we're going to choose mackerel, not Macron. I'm afraid we want our waters back. It was a red line for many Brexiteers, and I'm not going to start crying for them. Now, I want to finally wrap up. You may remember one of the political corpses has bobbed back to the surface today. Lord Adonis. Do you remember him? In fact, as Dominic Frisby said, who is Lord Adonis? Now, I can't swear on a family show. He's been droning on again today, Belinda. Please put us out of our misery. What's he said?
Oh, it's quite laughable, really. The Express reported that Lord Adonis had said, if Biden wins, that's the end of Brexit. And it's got a serious backlash because, of course, we all know about Brexit derangement syndrome. It can send perfectly nice and reasonable, clever people completely off the wall. I mean, he sounds a bit bonkers because, of course, we've already left the EU. And I don't know how Biden winning can force us back into the EU without another, referendum, which isn't going to happen in a long time. But yes, I think Lord Adonis, bless him, I think these politicians that were so fanatical about the EU, they're never going to get off that train. And by saying Biden winning means the end of Brexit, the end of Cummings, I think he said, and the end of Boris. I think there are several politicians out there here who are suffering a little bit from a messiah complex because they don't have the power at all to do that. I don't think Biden will stop Brexit at all. I think there is a worry that, of course, with the Democrats, leading, that the Irish question will come up, but I'm not sure they'll torpedo a trade deal really. And as Pippa said on one of our shows earlier, they're not that interested in UK politics anyway. So we will see. But yes, bless Lord Adonis is back in the frame again.
Well, it's a fabulous roundup, Belinda. Thank you very much. Please stick around. And as for Lord Adonis, what an anti-democratic snake. Now, he said Labour vote, no, the people who voted for Brexit don't vote for the Labour Party at the last general election. Well, they didn't. So what you said actually helped the Conservatives get into power. This guy has tried everything in his power and beyond to derail the votes of 17.4 million of us who voted to leave the European Union. The good news is he's abjectly failed at every single hurdle. In fact, whatever he says, the opposite comes true. And as he's backing Biden, I'd then say maybe Trump's election in chances just improve. So thank you, Belinda. From Brexit derangement syndrome, let's go seamlessly into Trump derangement syndrome. Let's go and join Stuart Mitchell in New York. Now, Stu, you've flown out there a few days ago. You've been to Washington, D.C. You're now in the Big Apple. What's the mood on the ground?
Mood on the ground is one of tension. That's the best way to characterize it. As you come into Washington, D.C., you're normally used to seeing a city vibrant with politics and power and people campaigning, especially in the run-up to a presidential election. But at the moment, it feels it's kind of like a ghost town. It feels like a nation drained of color at the moment. It's like politics without the people. So in that sense, you have this very strange paradox where you've got one of the most polarizing elections in our lifetime about to happen. And yet on the streets, there's a feeling of almost nothingness. There's a very strong paradox there, but I think we have to emphasize what is on the line here. It feels like American democracy is fraying at the edges at the moment. And if a certain result comes into being, i.e. a contested election, and there's a contested between the two major parties and they refuse to concede and so on, it feels like there's a very real chance that America could descend into some very troubled times, especially as we're seeing Walmart pulling guns and ammo from the shops, rioting in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. currently boarding up shops as we walk down the street. It feels like a calm before the storm, and it's not good.
Yeah, and it isn't interesting that we've watched with horror from this side of the pond at those lootings. Friends of mine, journalist Elijah Schaefer, was violently assaulted in Philadelphia while filming an open, running, looting situation. You better be careful, mate. I mean, we love you to bits. You got to stay safe out there, mate.
Well, definitely. I mean, so far in Washington, D.C., you're relatively safer. But tomorrow, I'm going to be heading into Philadelphia, which obviously has been a flashpoint over the last few days. And also Pennsylvania being a swing state, it's going to be in play in a major way. And reporters aren't welcome. Pointing your camera in the wrong direction isn't advisable. So it will be something that I'm definitely giving an eye on.
Who'd have thought, that in 2020, journalists are afraid to be reporting on politics, and the public are afraid to even tell their friends and their work colleagues how they're going to vote. That's a point I want to pick up with James Lindsay in a moment, because he's come out this week and voted for Trump. Now, let's talk about this story about the Biden hard drive, which seems to have gained very little political and media traction, despite the fact it surely has the potential to greatly affect the outcome of this election.
Well, I think the big story here is, regardless of what one thinks of the hard drive and its contents and so on, and there are certain things in there that do pose very tough questions for Joe Biden, who seems to have just decided he's not going to address it in any way, shape or form. And let's face it, his campaign more or less is non-existent at certain points. The bigger story regarding the hard drive is the lack of coverage. It's clearly a relevant news story, and it almost universally across the mainstream media, for want of a better term, have refused to pick this up. Now, it may seem a cheap point to make, but if this was a hard drive that contained contents relating to Donald Trump, you could be assured it would be the biggest story in the world right now. And as it is now, it's essentially being left to, I was lucky enough to, while I was in Washington, D.C., to observe different people and different reporters and so on. And we actually got to visit Steve Bannon at one point and observe what he was doing with relation to the hard drive. And that's the thing, because the mainstream media has essentially absolved itself of its responsibilities regarding the hard drive. It's being left to other people to pick it up and run with it. And it's not good. And it honestly does feel like, with regards to the media, a Rubicon has been crossed in this last 5 or 6 months in terms of their behaviour. You know, we had CNN talking about mostly peaceful protests with flames in the background. We've had the 1619 project with the New York Times, which James Lindsay would be able to talk about with more authority than me. But the way in which they were quietly editing away post events, it's not acceptable behaviour, and I think it's going to lead to a lot of long-term damage in the future as regards to people's views of the media and who they can trust and who they can't trust.
And again, I think that's another echo of the Brexit story, isn't it? I mean, I've been a journalist for 25 years. I've never seen trust in journalism at the low point that it is now in the UK. I think we rank something like 3rd in the world for trust. And I think America, it's even more so. Very different media in America, of course, Stuart. They're bombarding political advertising out, something that's banned in the UK. How relentless is that at the moment? Oh,
well, you're seeing it everywhere from all sides, and to a degree that's inevitable, and that's not a massive change from the past. I suppose the temperature of it is slightly ramped up, though. This is a very, very antagonistic campaign, and the bigger issue is you have America that's very divided. So while in the past I think campaigns have been antagonistic, now it seems to be involving the citizenry more than it ever has before. And then, as we were talking previously, the potential for that to actually break down into real world violence does seem palpable at the moment. And again, not good for the world's leading democracy, probably the most important nation in terms of Western security. This is not a good position for its body politic to be in at the moment.
Again, I'm really looking forward to talk to James Lindsay about that. So finally, before we let you get back on the road to Philly, what's been the media reaction, the public reaction to Nigel's speech with Donald?
It's been interesting. Again, as with anything on this, it's divisive. The thing with Nigel is, and it's a barnstorming speech, he understands that Trump represents something in this country, and that there are many voters who feel like he fights for them. Now, whatever people's liking or disliking of Trump, that is a reality. And that being a reality, people need to try and understand the roots of what has happened. Too much of the politics I'm seeing at the moment seems to be is remove Trump, all of the problems that America has and the world has will go away. But the fact of the matter is that the conditions that led to the election of Trump are still there. They're still present, they're still very serious, and many of them haven't been addressed. And if people think they can just put the genie back in the bottle by changing the president, I think they're in for a very rude awakening.
Do you know what? That's been fabulous, Stu. You know, I've been a big fan of yours for ages. You're normally the man behind the camera. Today, you're in front of the camera. It's just brilliant to see. Thank you from New York. Stuart Mitchell, Unlock's US correspondent, and please keep feeding back into us over the coming days. Thank you very much. Now, moving swiftly onwards to our next guest on Unlocked, James Lindsay. We've had on the show before, an absolutely epic thinker, also has a fantastic Twitter feed. You must check that out. The founder of New Discourses and the co-author of Cynical Theories, how universities made everything about race, gender, and identity. So we touched upon this at the top of the show. James, you've come out this week as somebody who's publicly admitted to voting for Donald Trump. Now, what drove that decision and what's been the reaction to it?
So that decision unfolded over a period of months. I did not set out to vote for Trump. In fact, I've been for about a year not knowing who I'd vote for. And at some point, watching the behavior of the Democrats, and they nominated Joe Biden, and watching their nods toward the woke phenomenon, if you will, I concluded that I was going to vote for myself, and that I feel like I could not vote for either candidate. And then I started to watch the way that the media was handling various issues, the protests, for example, Stuart just described, the hard drive issue, which Stuart also just described. And I started to see more and more articles and agitation started to come up around wanting to change the Constitution, to change the Supreme Court, to add justices to the Supreme Court. Then with Amy Coney Barrett, where she said, you know, the thing about sexual preference, and then within a day, the dictionary changed the definition. This is not a constellation of behaviors that is trustworthy to empower somebody who very well could greenlight. And if you look at his policies on his website, he and Harris's campaign website about racial equity, about Black America, they have these pages describing things that if you understand the woke ideology are very scary. This does not seem to be the kind of situation in which you can empower that. And then on the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who about a month ago or so issued an executive order against the teaching of the divisive concepts in critical race theory. He did it in a very even-handed way. He did it in a very responsible way, banning racial and sex scapegoating and stereotyping. He didn't come out in some weird, heavy-handed ban that doesn't make any sense. He still says that you can teach the concepts in an academic fashion, but he says that you can't train people in the concepts in a kind of I don't know, a war employee training situation where you're just kind of held hostage to it. So these things came together to tip me over and decide, even though in my state, it's certain that my state almost will go for Trump anyway, and we have the Electoral College, so my vote doesn't count much one way or the other, but I wanted to take the symbolic action of voting for Trump to throw my support behind that and to come out publicly and say so.
And so as far as the reaction to that goes, I mean, we're hearing a lot in the UK about people having their windows smashed if they have Trump placards in them, people being attacked. I mean, is this actually happening, or is it more fake news media?
I don't know. I do know that I had some conversations in the past couple of days with friends here, with friends more broadly via text message, and with some friends in Texas. And in all cases, it was agreed upon that even in states like Tennessee, where I live, states like Texas, which are famously kind of conservative and libertarian and free, people say that they would definitely not wear a Make America Great Again hat in public for fear of their own safety. So whether or not these things are actually happening, and I think they are in some areas, I don't know how prevalent they are. There is certainly this atmosphere of fear around the idea that you would publicly proclaim your support for the sitting president.
Isn't it astonishing that in the land of the free, the greatest power on earth, people are too scared to tell people how they're voting? I find that utterly tragic. I really, really do. I mean, how did it get to this point, James?
Well, our politics have been driving into a kind of existential state of polarization for a number of years. I even wrote an essay along with my co-author, Helen Pluckrose, in 2017, talking about the concept of existential polarization, where each side believes that it's an existential threat if the other side gets power, which drives people to more and more and more radicalizing extremes against the other side. We could talk about the dynamics on social media and kind of get into some deep stuff if we wanted to make some guesses about how it got this way. But I think the ultimate dynamic is that each side of our two-sided system believes that empowering the other is the end of the world. And so this is, in some sense, a thing that has been fed very much by our media, which, as Stuart talked about, we have lots of reasons not to trust. We have CNN specifically designed a marketing strategy around news media to portray it like sporting events with one team against the other, and to kind of use the same sort of structure to portray it. So we've been fed this polarization. I can't remember an election in my lifetime that, at least, you know, maybe when I was a young child, when Reagan was in office, I don't know, but from my memory, where it wasn't the most important election of our lifetime. Every single election I've ever had is the most important election of our lifetime. And so there's this driving force has been present in the United States to polarize and increase the stakes on every election. And this is that disease where Stuart said that the disease is present. A lot of people say Trump is the symptom. I don't actually believe that Trump is the symptom in the strict sense. I think it's a step further back. I know this is a little bit of a tortured technical analogy or metaphor, But if you get a virus like flu or even this coronavirus, oftentimes what becomes very dangerous to you is what's called a cytokine storm. It's a reaction of your immune system. That's what causes you to get the bad fever. That's what causes you to feel awful. That's what causes your health to go into risk. And I believe that Trump and the movement around him are a cytokine storm to a disease that has infected us, and the disease itself could possibly be fatal.
Yeah, and again, that's another huge parallel I think we can draw to this side of the pond. I mean, the media was the same towards Brexiteers. We were called racists, xenophobes, Little Englanders, Nazis, fascists, and in many ways, a lot of those insults were merely recycled and applied to Trump. Having been a journalist throughout all of these elections, I don't remember anything like this ever in my life. And you know what? The last time we spoke, James, when you mentioned things like rewriting the Constitution, we've seen already about changing the American anthem. We're talking about rewriting central tenets of your very existence. This, to me, feels like the very fabric of American political society existence is going to be torn up.
I think that that's exactly right. And so when we talk about this virus in terms of polarization, I believe the polarization in not all, but many respects has arisen because there has been a dedicated and intentional movement to do exactly that, to tear at the seams of our society, and specifically American society, for a very long time, that has come to a maturity. That's what our book Cynical Theories is about, is documenting how this set of ideologies came to maturity. And it says explicitly, if you read their own textbooks, they say explicitly that they believe that the great systemic evils like racism and sexism and transphobia and homophobia, and you go on forever, listing the different systemic evils, and fascism are actually written into the fabric of society. And they say openly that they're objective in what they call critical social justice, or critical theory applied to the idea of achieving social justice. The objective is to tear at the seams of the fabric of society. And I believe that they have, at this point, pulled an awful lot of threads loose. It's not just the edges of our democracy that are fraying. They have pulled a lot of threads loose. And this is the disease that I think that Trump's election and everything around that symbolizes, an immune response to.
If the whole point of this, through education, academia, the media, if the whole point is to, in a sense, poison the well from which everybody drinks to a position where they believe patriotism is akin to fascism, where the belief in the American central values are treated as toxic, what's the end game? I mean, what do they want?
It's really kind of a odd situation, because what they want is they want to destabilize the existing system, which they feel excludes voices like theirs that have this particular way of thinking about the world, and thus empower themselves. So what they want is what basically everybody who's slightly totalitarian wants if they have a movement behind them, which is to empower themselves. It's very easy to mistake this and think that it's, oh, well, they want to put Black people on top of the pile, but that's not what this is about, because critical race theory is so centrally concerned with Black, is why I bring that particular race up. It's not about that. It's about empowering the people who believe in this ideology. You can look at example after example after example of Black American voices that have spoken up and either said that they're going to vote for Trump, or that they don't hate Trump, or that they disagree with the critical race theory, or they disagree with the Black Lives Matter. And the next day somebody says that they're not Black. So it has absolutely nothing to do with just putting certain races or identity groups on top. It has to do with putting a capital P party that believes in certain ideas and an ideology in full power. That's their objective.
Well, I mean, look, there's some great stuff coming up here. If you like what you're seeing on the show, please share it, comment below the line on Facebook, and send us in your questions, your comments, and get involved in the hashtag Unlocked. Now, James, next question. I think we're being sold the illusion that if Trump is voted out next week and Biden gets in, then all of the rioting, all of the civil unrest, all of the huge discord is simply going to vanish. Is that the case, or is it going to get worse?
I do not think that that is the case. I don't know exactly what will happen with it specifically. It will certainly be used strategically, perhaps more strategically. That may mean that it ramps up, like in cities like Portland and Seattle, where you see very little pushback. It hasn't stopped. It flared up in June and it hasn't stopped. It never went away. that could be the outcome of a permissive Biden administration if he takes office. On the other hand, it could act much more strategically and quietly, striking only when it needs to achieve some agenda, while at the same time our administrative apparatuses at the federal first and then possibly other levels get further and further filled with activists who are going to support this. We'll see, for example, the possibility of placing more and more district attorneys that aren't going to hold people to account when they do break out into violence. So it's very difficult to tell whether they will calm down or not. It's certainly the case that the activists who are rioting do not like Joe Biden either. And they will definitely want to use riots and all of this violence, arson and threat and so on to pressure his administration to do their demands. And the question is just whether or not he's more permissive than Trump. I think that the behavior will probably be similar. Now, what you will see is a lot of people who are excusing that behavior under a rubric of "but Trump" may get their eyes opened. So this is why I thought that this was a hard decision to make about which of the two is better to vote for. But I'm so worried about the ability to install an administrative apparatus that's full of woke people and federal judges that are woke, that I thought that voting for somebody who's willing to stand up against it explicitly to buy us working room, not breathing room, was a necessity.
And that leads me on to my next question. There's a lot of feeling that Joe Biden is an empty vessel to be filled by other people, or even to be outright replaced by Kamala Harris, vice president. Is there a feeling that he's a kind of Trojan horse for this kind of more insidious power of the Black Lives Matter movement, people that have kind of been backing this movement all along? They're going to want some power, right? They're going to want some action. And what does that mean for America if we are putting critical race theory? I'm assuming he'll put it straight back into action. This idea where we are teaching white people to be ashamed of who they are. I mean, what's the political fallout going to be if Biden gets in?
I see absolutely no reason to believe that Joe Biden will stand up to the agitations to install this ideology. It's just a matter of how much pressure they have to apply and how willing he is to install it. I think he will put it right back in. I think that he will be pressured for every demand he meets to meet two more demands that will come out of nowhere. And that is how this ideology operates. That is what it does. And when it finds somebody who's permissive, it takes advantage of them by repeatedly doing that same thing over and over again. So I see absolutely no reason to believe that we won't see institutionalized critical race theory, but also we all talk about critical race theory, but nobody's talking about queer theory. Nobody's talking about the post-colonial side of theory. Nobody's talking about gender theory. Nobody's talking about disability studies or fat studies or crip theory or all of these other aspects of the theory that go on and on and on and on. And so the fallout of that is, as I said a moment ago, the point of these theories, they say so themselves. This isn't me riffing. This isn't me figuring it out. This isn't me decoding some secret. They say it themselves explicitly, is to tear apart the fabric of the American society, the liberal order, Western societies in general, Enlightenment rationalism, equality theory, and the neutral principles of constitutional law. This is in black and white in their texts. They say that this is their objective. So we institute that at many levels in our government. We find people that are not willing to stand up to it if there's lawfare waged against it. And what's going to happen is we can expect a rampant increase in the amount of people who are willfully trying to tear apart those fundamental institutions of American society. And because most of them we will have that are placed in, say, administrative spots within our federal government have no accountability to the voter, we have no way to get them back out. So I think this is what we will face. When we talk about the post-colonial side, though, that's where we're going to start talking about globalism. That's where we're going to start talking about changing immigration law, because it's not fair. It's an oppression that the West has all of these great things and all these great values and all this freedom, and that other people don't have that. So we have to let them in, and we have to support them. These are the things that follow reliably from the theory. These are the things that they argue in their activist pieces. And it's only a question of how much of it gets injected directly, how much of it is installed because of somebody caving in, and how little, I should say, of it will be resisted by an administration that's going to definitely be weak to it.
You know, I've got some brilliant comments coming in on Facebook here. I'm getting WhatsApp by people, James. People are saying, I've never heard anybody like James Lindsay talk about American politics this way before in the British mainstream media. This is a real eye-opener. Why can't we have more people like James Lindsay talking common sense? Because, you know, we get such a narrow spectrum of views in our mainstream press, and that's what Unlocked is setting out to do. Now, Stuart, I've seen you nodding away furiously there with a lot of the stuff that James is saying. Would you like to ask him a question, mate?
Yeah, I would. I think one of the things I've seen recently, and it slightly disappointed me, is I've seen many of some prominent anti-woke thinkers, when it's coming to the crunch moment, have decided to side with Joe Biden. And listening to what James just said, which I think is incredibly relevant and incredibly true, how does he feel about that? Because I feel at the key moment, they're making a big mistake that many of them are going to regret deeply down the line.
I am a little disappointed, I have to confess. I try to be as liberal as possible so that I don't feel necessarily disappointed in what other people do with their free decisions. And I try to respect those for what they are. I understand their argument because I made the argument myself until quite recently. There are two, as far as I see, primary reasons to be concerned about voting for Biden over Trump. One would be the climate change issue, because it does not seem that Donald Trump takes that issue as seriously, from my perspective, as it should be. I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But I think that it could be taken more seriously and should be taken more seriously. Now, my reply to that is no. The woke aren't going to take it seriously either. They'll replace it with climate justice, which is just another set of levers to install power for themselves, in which they will turn every argument into racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and they won't achieve anything technical or necessary. And they're certainly not going to bring people together unless it's under some kind of a tyrannical situation. The second, and this is the more important one, is what's going to happen to the culture. They rightly point out that this is a culture war that cannot be fought at the ballot box. This is a correct assessment. And the question is, what's going to happen to the culture? Is 4 more years of Trump going to drive the woke to the point where they blow up, or is it going to drive the woke to the point where people see them for what they are and they go away or start to be turned against? And I think that what my response to those people is that I think that I don't want to call them naive. I think that they're faithful. I think they have too much faith that it can't happen here. I think they have too much faith that the liberal order, that this ideology expressly says its goal is to call into question and dismantle, will hold no matter how much people try to call it into question or dismantle it. I think they have too much faith in a system that is a very good system, but is a system that from the beginning, its creators said has to be defended with eternal vigilance. And they are not being as vigilant as they need to because they have too much faith in that system. They think too much in line with when Francis Fukuyama wrote The End of History in 1989 and said, liberalism has won, story over, it's just going to now slowly spread around the world. They think that that's just how it is. And I think they are dangerously wrong in that assumption, and that it could definitely happen here.
I think one of the other problems is, sorry, just very quick one. One of the other problems is that I think since the end of the Cold War, when you talk about the Fukuyama point, is that to some degree we've been asleep at the wheel, and we're still finding it hard to wake up to this nightmare, and we're still hoping against hope that it's all going to be okay. If we can just turn the clock back to before Trump, it'll all go back to normal. It'll be fine. And I just think that's a really, really false dawn for these people.
It wasn't normal in the 1990s, so that's well before Trump. It wasn't normal then.
Yep, great.
Okay, so I'd like to pull the conversation back onto Brexit, if I can. James, as an American, watching what happened to the historic moment in Britain 4.5 years ago, seems like a lifetime ago, what did it look like to Americans? What did Brexit look like and stand for?
Two things at once, depending on which side you were on. If you found yourself on the left, it looked like a bunch of hillbilly fools deciding that they wanted to risk everything for their national sovereignty. And if you were on the right, especially the Trump supporting right, then it looked like a bunch of clear-eyed patriots who wanted to risk everything to try to rescue their national sovereignty. The left certainly had a very negative opinion and thought it was very embarrassing. The right had a very positive opinion and thought it was bold and brave. So that's what it would have looked like 4.5 years ago. I think much of that opinion has not changed. It depends on which side you're on. So maybe the certain individuals have changed, but the sides have not changed in their general orientation and opinion to that. I do think it's a complicated thing. I think when Richard Dawkins spoke up and said that he felt like he was not qualified to be able to weigh on such a complicated matter as a voter, that I sympathize with that. It is a very complicated question. But I also recognize right now that there are these supranational entities that are trying to establish control, and that nations need to be very aware of and very concerned about this. So my eyes at least are open to the fact that there are entities that want people to be, or their governments, I should say, to become less accountable to their people so that they can call the shots. And so whether it's a European Union or then a greater group that then wants to have the European Union as one of its vassal states or whatever, that's something we all need to be very concerned about right now, because I think that the purpose of even all of this woke stuff ties into that there are entities who know that a weakened Western hegemony turns into an opening for such a thing. And this information is out there. If those of you who haven't heard of the Great Reset are encouraged to look it up. This is a plan that's been laid for a long time. It's worth looking into.
Now I can see Belinda nodding furiously away there. She wants to ask you a question, no doubt. But before that, just to tee you all up, I am going to ask you for your predictions for next week's presidential election. I was one of the very few journalists in the UK last time who called Trump to win. I also called Brexit correctly. It got much rolling of the eyes and much ridicule. This time I think it's harder to call. But Belinda, would you like to ask a question to James?
I wanted to ask James, often when I say to my friends, and I'll be honest, most of my friends are more Biden supporters, my American friends in London, and I say that Trump's clearly more pro-UK, and they say to me, you're just being fooled. Trump is America first all the way. His chat for the UK may sound very nice and rosy to our UK ears, but actually he will always put America first, and he'll do a trade deal that's clearly, obviously, in the best interest of America, and it's more chat than substance. Do you agree, or do you think that Trump's love for the UK goes deeper than that?
I think that both are true, to be honest. I do think that Trump will put America first. I do think that he has a special relationship or care for the UK, special support for the UK. In the sense of his America First agenda, which normally I hesitate to even say the words America First because of their historical precedent. But in the terms of that, the way that I think of that, if I want to be as positive about it as I can, is that when they tell you every time you board an aircraft that before you put the mask on somebody else, like one of your children, that you put your mask on yourself first. And I'm not saying that like Britain is one of America's children. It's kind of the other way around, of course. Speaking as a colonist. But the truth is that economically speaking, and in terms of raw power, if America is in dire straits, it's not in a position to help smaller nations in terms of economic size, military size, and so on. So there is a sense of responsibility to make sure that our house is in order before we step out to help other people as well. So in that sense, I think it's a more complicated thing. It's very funny that the Biden voters who claim to be so clear in understanding systemic everything don't understand simple systems of national and international politics either.
Okay, that's fabulous. Now, I understand our American guests have to fly off in a moment. So while I've got you on the line, I'd like to go around everybody, please, for their US presidential predictions for next week, starting with James Lindsay. Who's going to win, James?
I don't know. It's the most opaque one I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen one that's so hard, but the number of people, so that's to say I'm scared. The number of people who have reached out to me, and of course I've become a lightning rod for this, so the bias is there, but the number of people have reached out to me to tell me that they are secretly going to vote for Trump, or that they've lied to the pollsters specifically and are voting for Trump, or have voted for Trump, or have voted for Trump for the first time after voting for Democrats for 40 years in elections consistently, tells me that it's possible that he may actually pull this one off. I don't know how wide of a margin that he will have, so I will lean toward Trump. I will virtually guarantee we're going to have a situation where somebody makes it into a contested election, and we will not know who was elected on November 4th. And we are going to have some, at least days, if not months, of tremendous unrest like Stuart warned about.
Wow. Okay. Stuart Mitchell, what's the scores on the doors? Who do you think is going to win?
I'm leaning towards Trump in a certain manner as well. But I mean, we have so many wild cards with this. We have COVID, so it becomes very difficult to gauge moods amongst the population and so on. So that's one thing. We also have the mail-in voting system. So you have the chance that a Trump victory of some type could happen on the night. No one will call it, and then mail votes keep raining in over the days after, and that would then play into this notion of a stolen election and a contested election. And in terms of the fabric of American democracy, that is the great danger, and that's what I'm worried about. So we shall see.
Okay, Stuart Mitchell from New York, thank you very much. I know you've got to fly off, mate, but I just want to say before you go that you have been calling that from the very, very beginning. You're one of the first people I spoke to many months ago who were saying this postal vote system could well be the story, not only of America, but the defining story of democracy globally moving forward. Because if the presidential election in America is overturned or contested, well, the ripples for that globally are going to be seismic and huge. Stuart Mitchell, thank you very much, and stay safe in Pennsylvania, my friend. Thank you very much. Quickly, Belinda de Lucy. Belinda, what's your prediction? So far, we got 2 for Trump, but anarchy afterwards. What about yourself, darling?
Well, according to Nancy Pelosi, of course, it doesn't matter who wins the votes. Biden's going to be president anyway. I mean, that's what's concerning to me, that even if Trump does win, the Democrats just won't accept it. Of course, I hope that Trump does just edge forward a bit and claim victory. I just worry what's going to happen the months following, and whether the Democrats will allow Trump to take his place. So I am concerned that whatever happens, Biden's going to take it in the end. Okay, and John Tennant. So far, we've got 3 for Trump, but chaos afterwards. You going to make it 4? Or are you going to go for Biden, Captain?
I think Trump might just about pull it off. The reason I say that is as someone who's been involved in elections for a long time, the incumbency effect does have a strong effect on outcomes and voting intentions. But again, I agree with both James and Belinda in the sense that whatever the result is on Monday, I think we're going to see months and months of legal challenge and a refusal for either side to concede. But we'll see.
Yeah, okay. Well, so far we've got this. This makes this a British first, a unique in Britain. We've actually got 100% of people saying Trump's going to win. I never heard that before. Maybe we've all lost our minds. Maybe we can just see a little bit further. I absolutely do think that the polling is completely immaterial and bogus, the same as it was with Brexit. Not a single damn poll called Brexit, apart from the only poll that matters, the exit poll on the night. And why, oh why did they get it wrong? Because they don't speak to ordinary people. They don't understand the voters' intentions or what motivates them, and people don't trust the pollsters. As James was saying a moment ago, people outright lying about their voting intention, because I think people see the polls for what they are. It's going to be an election unlike any other. I'm calling Trump to squeak it on the night and anarchy to follow. Wow, we've got 5 out of 5 here. Now that's brilliant. Now, James, Lindsay, the comments are just pouring in about how refreshing it's been having you on the show. You've certainly built a big fan base this side of the pond in Britain tonight. If you need to pop off, matey, we can let you go now. You've been very generous with your time. If you want to stick around, of course, you're absolutely welcome. A friend of ours from America, James Lindsay. Now,
I'm hanging out for a minute.
Okay, mate. You see, John, you just can't wait to hear about your book. This book is coming out. Can you see it? John Tennant, my former MEP colleague for the Brexit Party. Rebooting Brexit is your book. You're also a councillor up in Hartlepool, so a man still involved in the front line of politics. A great, great friend of mine. As you say in the book, we enjoyed a beer or 3, oftentimes in Brussels. Well, we had to lessen the pain somehow. So, John, let's start off with the book. And it's a romping read. It's got a fantastic foreword by Nigel Farage. It weighs in at 130 pages, lots of pictures that have brought a tear to my eye, mainly when I saw the amount of drinks on your bar tab. John, now let me know, what encouraged you to write this book, matey?
Well, I'll tell you a little story, actually. When we were there, when Nigel made his final speech to the European Parliament, we then retired to what was the Mickey Mouse bar. I actually wrote on a scrap of paper the first line of the books. I resolved there and then to write about it, because what we were involved in was something so unique to British politics over the last 20 or 30 years. It needs to be put into black and white. So what I did was I folded up that piece of paper, I put it in my top pocket, I enjoyed the rest of the week. And then the following week, when I was sorting out my luggage and everything, and sorting out the things I need to send to the dry cleaners, I actually found that note and I thought, better get cracking and writing that. Basically, I wanted to leave a legacy of the Brexit Party, because I do have a terrible feeling actually, that the establishment will try to take Brexit as their own work. In fact, if it wasn't for the Brexit Party, I don't think Brexit would genuinely have ever happened.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a great picture here of us. We just voted in the chamber here, and that was the moment where we're waving our flags and the media greeted us. John, it was an emotional roller coaster. You've been involved in the Brexit movement for far longer than I was. I was a commentator going on about Brexit on the TV, in the print media, and on the radio. You've been involved for a long time. What's the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen or witnessed, or come to the conclusion that the Brussels machine was an absolute aberration? What's the most absurd thing you've ever witnessed?
Oh, goodness me, that's a good question. The most absurd is probably just the sheer level of paperwork and bureaucracy of the tiniest little thing. If you get slightest piece of paperwork wrong, they send it back and you've got to do it all over again. I mean, remember stories like Bendy Bernardes and such like, all sorts of. There's too many to actually mention, really. But I think when you talk about the real absurdity of the last year, 2019, they were consistently making arguments that there was still a majority of people that wanted Britain to stay in the European Union. I said, what? We had 17.4 million people voted to leave it. I don't know what papers they were reading. I don't know what polls they were looking at. And that just measured up the absurdity of the European institutions. They just do not listen.
One of the things that we made a great point of doing, and I know you were doing this too, you were doing a lot of speeches out there, but we were being really disruptive, weren't we? We were kind of gonzo journalists with our iPhones. We were filming how fast they were leaving votes. They were getting paid €300 for 20 minutes work on top of their salary before steaming off for another croissant. I mean, when you got up close and personal, the level of wastage was astronomical, wasn't it, in terms of the money being burned by Brussels and Strasbourg?
Absolutely, and it does raise the question as to whether you have people there who actually are there for the right reasons. And I mean, I do remember though that there was the other side of it. There was many MEPs who did speak to us, who actually quietly sort of agreed with what we were saying, but would never publicly say it. They would never do it. They wouldn't dare. There was someone close who came out publicly and said, like Laura Huhtasaari of Finland, who very, very openly expresses her sentiment towards Brexit, her positive sentiment towards Brexit. But you know what? I think one thing I wanted to really highlight in the book was to recapture the emotion and the spirit at the times that we were involved in, and so were many of our parliamentary candidates in the general election, many of the activists who worked so hard during those campaigns in the face of quite a lot of insults and kind of media twisting of various different people and so on. I wanted to recapture that spirit, and I hope that book does achieve that.
Well, it certainly has. Now, Belinda, if you could unmute your microphone, because I want to talk to Belinda. I want Belinda to talk to you about a glorious thing that's happened on Unlocked. We did a Eurosceptic special. You mentioned there, John, that we were not alone in that parliament, and Unlocked, Belinda, has been sowing the seeds of Euroscepticism, hasn't it?
Yes, well, I mean, we've managed to get some of the MEPs that supported us very much in Parliament actually connected together from France, from Italy, from Denmark, from the Netherlands, and they're now contacting each other. And I do think there is a movement building. The seeds have been sown. They're putting a lot of trust and faith in us as the loyal Brexiteers to see Brexit through. Because of course, if Brexit doesn't work, then their whole movements will feel a real sort of crash to the floor again. So we've got to do it for them as well. And they're desperately trying to reform the EU, but they just don't see any way it's going to reform. So they're working together now. The countries are coming together, and I think they're traveling to each other, talks and sessions to speak about Euroscepticism. It's the same in their countries. The mainstream medias do not allow Eurosceptics to come on and criticize the EU and talk about the missing billions of money and the power grabs over national parliaments. You don't hear that. And our French friends and Italian friends, they say exactly the same things going on in their countries too. So they are being connected, John. So we have left a little bit of a legacy as long as we keep standing in solidarity with them now.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, you know, like I say, one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, so that there is a legacy, and that there is something left there in black and white, that we did exist, we did actually make something happen, and we want that to be felt for many years to come. And I feel that, you know, that we do have some people left over in the European Parliament, various different countries, who will try to take that argument further. Of course, there has to be an understanding that some of them are anti-Euro, some are anti-Schengen, and they have varying different degrees of Euroscepticism. But as I said the other day, I think that they themselves may well reach the point whereby they will consistently be ignored, there won't be any reform, and their only conclusion will be they must leave the European Union as well.
Brilliant stuff. Now, John, I'd like to end our interview today on a smile, because there were lots of tears in the European Union, mainly when Guy Verhofstadt spoke or Ursula von der Leyen spoke. But there's a funny story in this book, Rebooting Brexit, page 107. There's a picture of me stealing a Union flag from the Parliament in Strasbourg. Would you like to quickly outline to Unlocked viewers what that story was about, please?
Okay, well, Martin, you know, you're a typical cheeky chappy who likes to do mischievous things, don't you? And you did something really quite mischievous indeed. You very, very quietly removed the Union Jack from the Strasbourg chamber and managed to take it home to the UK, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And I must say that was one of the proudest moments of my life. And I tell you, you remember why we did it. It wasn't just a prank. They actively banned displays of national unity from the Parliament. They told us, because it was always a tradition of first UKIP and then the Brexit party to have Union flags on our desks. It became our trademark, and it's something that caught on. The French Eurosceptics, the Germans, the Greeks, the Finns, they started displaying their own flags. The chamber took a dislike to it, and they gave a speech, and Brian Monteith rose like a salmon, didn't he? Tell us about that story.
Yeah, well, obviously we were all there in the chamber, and just I think the day prior, the flags had been removed, according to the President of the European Parliament, and something that we didn't know about, nobody knew about, it simply came in and removed them. Of course, we got a little bit, a bit perturbed by that. And the following day, we were about to go in to do the voting session, and I think one of the French MEPs stood up to raise a point of order. And of course, what ensued was this confusion about how is it that the President of the European Parliament can arbitrarily make a decision such as that, which frankly just came across as quite childish, really. And Brian stood up to defend our right to have the flag on our desks, quite rightly, and of course any other nation as well. And one Liberal MEP stood up and said, well, you know, you're not allowed to have a glass of water on your table, so why you've got to put it down on the floor. So why isn't the flag to be allowed on? Well, you can't really compare your flag to a glass of water. So of course, Brian Monteith stood up and said, my flag is not a glass of water. Spot on, Brian.
Yeah, and it was absolutely epic. It was a real, you know, he's a proud Scotsman. It was a real Braveheart moment. He went, my flag is not a glass of water. That sounded more like Swahili. Sorry, terrible. But there was a huge, huge round of applause at that moment. We all rose to our feet. All of the chamber of the Eurosceptics rose up in a display of unification. And in that moment, crystallized the idea we were not alone as being Eurosceptics. We planted the seeds, and it was a marvelous, marvelous moment. And I was so enraged. I found out that they were planning to take down every Union flag from both Strasbourg and Brussels, and to fold them up and to put them into a dark antechamber in storage in case we ever decided to rejoin the European Union, because they were so convinced we got the wrong choice. They were so convinced this would be overturned. That was the moment I lost it. I retired to the MEP bar. I had a couple of sherbets just to kind of give myself a bit of Dutch courage, British courage, as it turned out. I took the flag and I took it home with me. Now, you call my prank here childish, John, which I'm disappointed about, because I thought you thought it was an act of heroic national display. But look, I'm going to tell you what happened for the first time. I've never revealed what happened to that flag. Do you know what happened to it, John?
No, I'm very interested in what you're going to say next.
Because I took it home and word crept out when I was on the Eurostar, and I'd had a couple of champagnes by this point. I was feeling pretty celebratory, right? I just liberated a Union Jack from the European Parliament. It's as close as I came in my small life to feeling like a hero, apart from when we just voted to leave the European Union, of course. I took the flag home. Nigel Farage phoned me up. Daubney, I hear you've got a flag. I went, yes, boss, because I thought I was in real trouble. He went, make sure you put it in the Sun newspaper. So it went in the Sun newspaper, which is Britain's most popular, biggest selling newspaper. And I got a letter from President Sassoli, the very president of the European Union itself, wrote to me. Now I knew, John, it wasn't an invite to go for a drink. I knew this letter would not be a good thing. The letter said, and this is the first time I've revealed this, the letter said, either you return that flag or you will not be allowed to vote in Britain's vote to leave the European Union. And so I told Nigel Farage, and guess what he said to me? He said, Daubney, you better go back to London and get that flag. So I did. I got on the Eurostar home. I slept in that flag. I wrapped that Union flag around me and I slept in it one final time. I got some selfies of my children wrapped in that historic flag. And the next morning, I took it back to Brussels. Sassoli's German lawyer came in. He was very German. He clicked his heels. He shook my hand. He took that flag off me and he took it back. And I was allowed to vote to leave the European Union. That flag almost cost me everything, but we took it back. That's the first time I've told that story. I haven't got the flag, but I still think it was worth it, because for that brief moment, John, it felt like the right thing to do. You still think I'm childish?
Yeah, I absolutely applaud the audacity and, of course, the symbolism of what you did, Martin. I think, you know what, it takes a man of real balls to do something like that, and you've definitely got them.
or somebody with real stupidity and no lack of concern for their career, reputation, such as it stands. Look, I'm going to wrap up this show. That was brilliant. It's been a really, really interesting debate. We've covered off Brexit. We've covered off the presidential election. This time next week, there's going to be a new president in the USA. Thank you for watching the show tonight. James Lindsay, once again, excellent. You're such a fabulous guest. Please, can we trouble you to come on again in the future? Belinda de Lucy, always superb with all the Brexit news. And next week, I want you back in the studio with me, darling. I want you back by my side, where you belong. John Tennant, Rebooting Brexit. It's the book to get for a Christmas present this year for the Brexiteer in your life. It's cheap, it's cheerful, a bit like John himself. Have a little go at this. Have a read. Stuart Mitchell has gone off to delve around for Unlocked in Philadelphia. It's been a great show. If you like what you've seen tonight, please share it. Please put it around social media, comment, get joined in, follow us. We're the new kids on the block. We want to go after the mainstream media with the stories they're too afraid to discuss, such as the ones today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the Daily Express for hosting us. We'll see you next time on Unlocked. Thank you and good night.